General XY Zor had razed entire planets to the ground, reduced civilizations to ash, and watched species beg for mercy before their inevitable annihilation. He had seen desperate resistance before, but nothing like this. Nothing like the humans. From the command bridge of his warship, he observed the battlefield below, a once thriving human metropolis now transformed into a chaotic war zone. His forces, the elite warriors of the Zarkari Dominion, had landed expecting a swift and decisive victory. Earth, after all, was primitive. Its people lacked the genetic enhancements, advanced war doctrines, and sheer technological superiority of the Zarkari. A single planetary cycle was all they had allocated to secure the planet. Now, deep in the trenches of battle, the general's mandibles clicked in agitation. His soldiers weren't advancing. They were stalling. On the war table before him, holographic displays flickered erratically, showing confused and fragmented reports. The once clear battle formations had collapsed into anarchy. The humans were everywhere, popping up from underground tunnels, repurposing their own shattered buildings into makeshift fortresses, weaponizing their very infrastructure. Every Zarkari attempt to control the battlefield was met with a response so unpredictable it bordered on madness. A transmission crackled through his command link. "General, the GHHH, humans are using incendiary AF." The line cut out. XY Zor turned to his second-in-command, Commander Vrazek, who had spent years studying Earth species. "Explain." Vrazek's iridges twitched, betraying unease. "General, their resistance is unconventional." XY Zor narrowed his gaze. "They're inferior. Their weapons are primitive. Their fleets are non-existent. This should have been over by now." Vrazek hesitated before responding. "Yes, General, but their tactics defy all logic. They attack in small, disorganized groups, yet strike with the precision of trained death squads. They have no regard for their own safety. We witnessed one human soldier strap explosives to himself and laugh as he charged our heavy artillery." XY Zor's mandibles clenched. It made no sense. Self-preservation was universal. Even the most desperate creatures fled when faced with superior firepower. But these humans, they ran toward it. A new alert flashed across the war table. A battalion of Zarkari troops had been wiped out in mere minutes. XY Zor expanded the feed. The footage showed a human force taking on heavily armored Zarkari enforcers with weapons that should have been ineffective: firearms, makeshift explosives, even crude melee weapons. And yet, the Zarkari fell, one after another, overwhelmed by sheer numbers and brutality. One Zarkari warrior was brought to his knees. A human, face smeared with dirt and blood, loomed over him and uttered something incomprehensible before delivering a final, brutal blow with the butt of his rifle. Vrazek analyzed the audio and provided a translation. He said, "You're not in Kansas anymore." XY Zor blinked. "What is a Kansas?" "I do not know, General." Before XY Zor could respond, another transmission came through. This time, it was from a ground squad leader. His voice panicked. "General, we are under siege. The humans have set fire to the oxygen processing units, and they..." A series of explosions cut him off. XY Zor clenched his fist as the signal died. The battle reports poured in, each more alarming than the last. The humans had lured Zarkari units into narrow alleys, only to collapse buildings on top of them. They had hijacked supply convoys, using stolen alien weapons against their invaders. They had hacked into Zarkari communication lines, broadcasting taunts and misinformation. And then there were the psychological tactics. Captured Zarkari troops had reported hearing human soldiers laughing amidst the carnage. Not the laughter of relief, not the bitter chuckles of the doomed. No, these were soldiers who were enjoying the battle. One prisoner recounted a chilling scene. A human standing atop a burning Zarkari transport, wielding two flamethrowers at once, screaming, "It's barbecue time, boys." XY Zor's mandibles tightened in frustration. This was not war. This was madness. A nearby officer trembled as he read another report. "Sir, the humans, they're broadcasting their own battle songs over our frequencies." XY Zor, tilted his head. Battle songs? Yes, General. They call it heavy metal. As if on cue, the warship's speakers crackled, and a deafening barrage of chaotic, screaming music flooded the bridge. XYZ deactivated the audio feed with a sharp gesture, resisting the urge to crush the console beneath his claws. This was spiraling out of control. He had underestimated these creatures, and the cost of that mistake was growing by the minute. Turning to Vrazek, he issued a curt order. Deploy the heavy artillery. No more half measures. I want this planet burning before the next cycle. Vrazek hesitated. General, if we escalate. Do it. The commander obeyed, sending commands to the fleet. Within moments, the skies above Earth darkened with the silhouettes of descending war machines, their energy cannons primed to incinerate everything below. If brute force was the only answer to this insanity, then so be it. But as XYZ watched, another unexpected sight made his blood run cold. Human aircraft, primitive in design, were ascending toward his forces. The Zarkari air superiority was unquestioned. These humans had no real defense against orbital bombardment. And yet, they were charging directly into the firestorm. Through the warship's external monitors, he zoomed in on one of the incoming aircraft. The pilot, clad in a rugged flight suit, had painted a crude message on the side of his jet. The translation flickered onto the screen. If I'm going down, I'm taking you with me. The aircraft rocketed forward, evading energy blasts, its trajectory locked onto a key Zarkari command vessel. XYZ barely had time to process what he was seeing before the human pilot crashed straight into the ship's central reactor. A blinding explosion erupted in the sky, sending shockwaves rippling across the battlefield. The flaming wreckage of the command vessel plummeted toward Earth. In the stunned silence that followed, only the humans' war cries filled the air. XYZ exhaled slowly. He had seen desperate last stands before. He had witnessed civilizations crumble. But this was something else entirely. This was not desperation. This was deliberate. The humans did not fight to survive. They fought to win. And for the first time in his long and blood-stained career, General XYZ felt something he had never known before. Fear. General XYZ stood motionless, his talons gripping the edges of the war table as the flames of his fallen command vessel still flickered on the display. The humans had no right to be this effective. They were supposed to be disorganized, inferior. Yet, they fought with the unrelenting aggression of a species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of war. They were impossible to predict, and worse, impossible to intimidate. He turned to Commander Vrazek, whose mandibles twitched in barely concealed distress. Status. Their forces are pressing forward, General. Vrazek struggled to keep his voice steady. We've deployed the heavy artillery as ordered, but they are adapting. Their ground troops are now using our own weapons against us. They've hijacked plasma launchers, personal energy shields, even light assault walkers. They reverse-engineered them in minutes. XYZ's mandibles clicked in agitation. That was absurd. Zarkari technology was generations ahead of anything Earth possessed. Their weapons required complex neurolink interfaces, biometric security measures, encrypted targeting systems. How could the humans possibly bypass those restrictions? As if reading his thoughts, Vrazek elaborated, his voice tinged with something dangerously close to fear. It appears they do not fully understand the technology, General. They simply force it to work. A new image flickered onto the war table. A squad of human soldiers wielding Zarkari plasma rifles, the weapons sparking and overheating from improper use. One human slapped the side of his rifle as if it were a faulty piece of machinery before firing another burst. Another soldier, lacking proper interface training, had simply duct-taped an alien energy shield to his arm. The transmission switched to a battlefield feed. A towering Zarkari war mech, a weapon capable of annihilating entire city blocks, stood in ruins, its cockpit breached. Its new operator, a human pilot, was clumsily maneuvering the machine while shouting, "I have no idea how to drive this thing, but let's go." XY Zor's claws dug into the table. This was not how war was supposed to work. A transmission came through from one of his field commanders, his voice ragged with desperation. "General, the humans are using." There was a pause, then the sound of a muffled explosion. A different voice, one belonging to a human, cut in over the line. "Hey, lizard guy, if you're listening, just wanted to let you know, your battle plan sucks." The transmission ended. XY Zor exhaled slowly. This was unacceptable. He turned sharply. "Deploy the suppression drones. Cut off their access to our technology. Jam their signals. If they are so reliant on stealing, let's see how they fare without their crutches." Vrazek hesitated. "General, we have already attempted countermeasures." He pulled up a different transmission, this one intercepted from human communications. A group of human soldiers huddled behind cover, speaking frantically. They shut down the stolen plasma cannons. "Great. Back to regular bullets." XY Zor's eyes narrowed. And the video continued. The humans simply shrugged, pulled out their conventional firearms, and resumed the fight with equal, if not greater, intensity. Their strategy did not change. Their aggression did not waver. They did not require superior weapons to be dangerous. They simply were. His species had always believed technological advancement determined supremacy. The humans had just proven that assumption wrong. A warning klaxon blared throughout the warship. One of the bridge officers snapped to attention. "General, the humans have breached one of our command centers." XY Zor snapped his gaze to the display, expecting to see a coordinated infiltration team, perhaps a team of elite human operatives executing a precision strike. What he saw instead was something far worse. 3 humans, wearing stolen Zarkari armor that barely fit their bulky frames, had simply walked through the front door. The guards had hesitated just long enough for the humans to open fire. One human, crudely disguised in a stolen Zarkari officer's cloak, had even mockingly saluted as he approached. "Greetings, fellow reptilian overlords." Nothing to see here, just some regular aliens doing alien things. The Zarkari stationed inside the command center had frozen in sheer disbelief. That hesitation had cost them their lives. XY Zor's blood burned. These creatures had no discipline, no order, no respect for the art of war. And yet, they were winning. His claws trembled as he turned away from the display. "We need to end this." Vrazek nodded gravely. "The fleet remains in orbit. We could execute a full planetary bombardment, burn the surface to glass." XY Zor remained silent, his mind churning through every tactical option. The Dominion had never encountered an enemy like this before. If they could not defeat them through standard military doctrine, they would need to change their approach. He turned to Vrazek, his voice firm. "No, if we wipe out the planet, we learn nothing. We must understand how they fight, why they fight. Deploy the elite death squads. I want human captives. I want them studied." Vrazek bowed slightly. "Understood, General." As the order was relayed, XY Zor allowed himself a moment of reflection. This battle was no longer about conquest. It was about survival. If the humans could outmatch the Zarkari here, on their own homeworld, with limited resources, what could they accomplish with time? If they ever reached the stars, if they ever expanded beyond this planet, what kind of nightmare would they become? A flicker of movement caught his eye. Another intercepted message, this time a human soldier's personal log. He accessed it, listening closely. The voice was tired, worn, but filled with something XY Zor couldn't quite place. Something between defiance and amusement. "They came here thinking we'd roll over, that we'd surrender. We're just a backwater species to them. But they don't get it. We're not fighting for survival." A pause. "We're fighting because it's fun." XY Zor cut the transmission. His hands curled into fists as he turned toward the bridge's observation window, staring down at the planet that had defied him. This was no ordinary war. This was something else entirely. General XY Zor had never considered retreat. Not once, in all the cycles he had served the Zarkari Dominion, had the thought even been an option. To retreat was to admit failure. To fail was to dishonor the Dominion itself. Yet as he stared down at the burning battlefield below, watching his once proud invasion force being torn apart, The thought no longer seemed unthinkable. It seemed inevitable. The humans had refused to break. They had refused to kneel, to surrender, to acknowledge the overwhelming force that had descended upon their world. Instead, they had dug their heels into the dirt and turned their very streets into weapons. They fought without fear, without hesitation. His best soldiers had been slaughtered by creatures who should have been outmatched, outgunned, and overwhelmed. But they weren't. Somehow, impossibly, the humans were winning. A new alert chimed from the war table, and XY Zor turned to see the latest battle report. It was worse than he expected. The humans had pushed past the last defensive lines surrounding his primary stronghold. What should have been an impenetrable fortress had become a target, and the enemy was closing in. Their advance was brutal and unrelenting. Entire Zarkari formations had crumbled under the sheer force of their assault. The elite death squads he had deployed had not returned. No bodies had been recovered. They had simply disappeared. His claws tightened against the console as he turned to Commander Vrazek, who stood stiffly at his side. The younger officer had lost the last remnants of his composure, his mandibles clicking nervously. "General, we must consider a tactical withdrawal." XY Zor did not reply. He could not. "We have lost air superiority," Vrazek continued, voice tense. "The human aircraft have taken down 2 of our main warships and crippled another. Our ground forces are in full retreat. If we do not evacuate now, we risk." The war table flickered again, cutting him off. A live feed from the battlefield filled the display. XY Zor's breath stilled. The humans had reached the gates. A lone Zarkari officer stood in the path of the oncoming wave of human soldiers. His armor was scorched, his weapon trembling in his grip. He raised his plasma rifle and fired. One of the human fighters took the shot directly to the chest and staggered. But then, impossibly, he straightened, his armor smoldering, and grinned. With deliberate slowness, the human raised his own weapon. XY Zor watched as the Zarkari officer dropped his rifle. He fell to his knees, mandibles quivering. He did not attempt to flee. He did not even attempt to fight. He simply stared at the humans in horror. The feed cut out. XY Zor exhaled. That was it. That was the moment his people had lost. Not when their warships had fallen, not when their weapons had been turned against them. It had happened the instant his warriors realized the truth. The humans were not fighting for survival. They were fighting because they wanted to. The Dominion's entire strategy had been built upon the assumption that fear was universal, that any species, when faced with inevitable destruction, would either submit or flee. But these creatures, they did neither. The humans did not see war as an obligation, as a necessary evil. They saw it as a challenge, a contest, and they were enjoying every moment of it. The war table shuddered as another explosion rocked the stronghold. The humans had breached the outer walls. XY Zor could hear the alarms blaring, the bridge officers frantically relaying orders that no longer mattered. The battle was over. The only decision left to make was how it would end. Vrazek turned toward him, his expression unreadable. "General," XY Zor looked at his second-in-command and saw the truth in his eyes. Vrazek wanted to fight, not out of duty, not out of honor, but because he could not fathom the alternative. If they fled now, the Zarkari would never be the same. They would never again hold the same fearsome reputation. Their dominion, their entire empire, would crack beneath the weight of this failure. But if they stayed, they would die. XY Zor made his decision. Order the retreat. His voice was steady, but it felt like an execution sentence. All remaining forces are to withdraw immediately. Abandon the stronghold. Vrazek flinched as if struck. "General, that is an order, Commander." A long silence stretched between them before Vrazek bowed his head. "Yes, General." The orders were given. Across the battlefield, Zarkari forces disengaged, pulling back toward the remaining warships. The humans did not pursue immediately. They stood atop their captured fortifications, watching the retreat unfold with an almost casual air, as if this outcome had been inevitable from the start. Some of them even seemed disappointed. XY Zor forced himself to remain composed as the warship broke from orbit the smoldering ruins of Earth shrinking beneath them. He did not allow himself to look away until the planet was gone from sight. In the silence of the bridge, Vrazek spoke. His voice was quieter now. What do we tell the Dominion? XY did not answer immediately. He turned away from the viewport, his gaze heavy. We tell them the truth. No one spoke after that. There was nothing left to say. Deep in his chest, XY felt something unfamiliar take root. It was not just defeat. It was not just humiliation. It was dread. Because he understood now. The humans had won this battle. And one day, they would leave their planet. They would look to the stars. And when they did, the Zarkari would not be the ones invading. They would be the ones waiting.